Greetings and welcome to Converging Streams, Interfaith Fellowship in Our Modern World. Our program is a production of the Muncie Interfaith Fellowship. This installment, Reflections on the Spiritual Power of Nonviolence, Part 3 of 3, features excerpts from a 2013 interview on Indianapolis radio station WICR for the program JourneysFire with host Richard Brendan discussing with Reverend George Wolfe his book, The Spiritual Power of Nonviolence. Here is the final installment of that interview.
Well, I thought about your book. I thought about this apocalyptic theology that you've also addressed. You address it very well in the book. We've touched on it in this interview. When something happened just recently with Michelle Bachmann's anti-Muslim paranoia that's made all the press, where she basically was accusing specific people, including Huma Abedin, Deputy Chief of Staff for Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, of being aligned with terrorists. And I was so pleased to see John McCain stand in Congress and go to the defense of these people. So God bless John McCain for doing that.
We have to understand that, a world without conflict, a world without war is not a world without conflict.
Good point.
A world without war is a world in which we learn to deal with our conflicts in nonviolent ways. And so when I see activism occurring, intensifying in the public arena in our country, that's good. It's a good thing. Now we tend to think that activism is bad if we don't agree with it. But we have to realize that there's in a world without war, in a world where we're going to still have conflict, but deal with the conflicts in a nonviolent way. We're going to have people being very passionate and dynamic in their activism. And it may go against what we believe, but that's far better than having a violent revolution. Now, I think what we're getting at, though, and what you're getting at here, is the concept of civil, that is to say, civil debate and civil dialogue.
Yes, and
too often in the political arena, the pundits and the politicians themselves cross that line. And that's what's unfortunate, and that really hurts the cause. See, Michelle Bachmann hurt her cause by crossing that line, and then John McCain had the opportunity, of course, to set it right. But it actually whatever was that the concern was coming from the other side there, that has been totally overshadowed by the negative, aggressive, uncivil rhetoric.
The subtitle of your book is Interfaith Understanding for a Future Without War. Can you speak to the fallacy of a phrase we often hear, unfortunately, a just war? Right, yes. In today's world, there is no such thing as a just war. And we tend to throw out that term in very careless ways. Of course, the doctrine of just war goes all the way back to St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas. And, at that time, there were plenty of open battlefields, so if two armies wanted to go out and duke it out with bows and arrows and catapults and so forth, why they could, and civilians wouldn't be harmed usually. But as time goes on, weapons become far more lethal. Population centers become much more dense. An honorable code of warfare degenerates and is degenerated now into what we see in terrorism. And so it's not possible to have a just war anymore, and we shouldn't use that phrase. Maybe a person wants to say it's a necessary evil. But it's just that it's an evil. We shouldn't try to somehow code it in language that makes it sound ethical or moral, because it's not. We're talking about the spiritual power of nonviolence with author George W. Wolfe. We've been talking throughout the interview about Gandhi. Can you talk about the concepts, some of the key concepts in which Gandhi based his philosophy of nonviolence? Well, yes. I mean,
First of all, I've already mentioned tapasya,
Yes.
which is this process of allowing the negative energy to be transformed into a positive direction. I've mentioned satyagraha, which is this allowing oneself to become a public victim of the injustice, to call public attention to the injustice, and to create a groundswell of support so reform can take place. The best illustration of that is Rosa Parks. When Rosa Parks sat on the bus and refused to give up her seat, she was arrested, taken to prison, fingerprinted, taken to prison, and so forth. And in doing so, she was performing an act of satyagraha. That's that act of calling public attention to injustice by allowing yourself to become a public victim of the injustice. We saw that in the Occupy movement recently when the police sprayed pepper spray on the students who were demonstrating in California. That's satyagraha in action. And sometimes it's necessary to do that in order to create the kind of groundswell support that's necessary to bring about reform. But Gandhi also had a concept of Swaraj, which is generally translated as home rule, but which I think we can apply to ourselves individually as self-reliance. It's very much, I see it as a kind of an Emersonian idea, if you want to look at it on the level of the individual, that we need to be strong and self-reliant, economically independent, to the degree to which we are in that position, to the same degree we are able then to take much more risks, which are sometimes required when we are pursuing a nonviolent path. Another important aspect of Gandhi, though, is really his ability to bring together people of diverse faith traditions. So Sikh, Muslim, Hindus all came together to adopt his approach to nonviolence and to dealing with the British oppression in India. And this interfaith theme, I think, is extremely pertinent now because we're living in a world which is increasingly pluralistic. Mm-hmm. It's really necessary for us to understand and appreciate the collective wisdom, which I think the wisdom which comes from the great religious traditions, which I call the collective wisdom of humanity. Every religion has the great world religions have contributed to this collective wisdom of humanity, and we need to appreciate the contribution that each of the religions has made. But more recently, this interfaith movement has really had quite an impact, and I can give you a personal example here in Muncie, Indiana.
Sure.
And there are there's an organization, an international organization called the United Religions Initiative, and it was begun by Bishop William E. Swing, who happened to write the foreword in my book. And the idea behind the organization is to develop cooperation circles around the world at the grassroots level, where people can come together from various religious traditions and have dialogue and approach problems within the community and resolve conflict that may arise between faith traditions before they develop into something highly negative and disruptive. And in Muncie, Indiana, we have the Muncie Interfaith Fellowship, we call it. And over the last several years, a woman who is a leader in the Jewish Reform Temple in town, and a woman who is with the mosque here in town, mm-hmm. they got together and they said, let's bring together members of the temple and members of the mosque and have a dinner. And this was, I guess, started 8 years ago or so, and they did that for 2 or 3 years, and recently, now this past year, they opened it up to other churches and religions that could come, and we had a wonderful meeting on March 4th, last March, where we had a dinner of over 125 people came. We had prayers or thanksgivings before dinner from Hindu, Sikh, Jewish, Christian, Muslim traditions, and Baha'i was also there represented. It was just a wonderful event, and it's an example of interfaith peace building. Peace building is when you develop these events or have events which bring people together, where you find common ground, you capitalize on that common ground. And I would encourage people, if they're interested in that in their community, to look into developing a cooperation circle with this organization called the United Religions Initiative, because it's really having an impact around the world. Because it's on a grassroots level, it isn't quite as visible, mm-hmm.
as you might think it should be, but it's really a very constructive approach to interfaith peace building, and that really is something that Gandhi started. Gandhi brought together Muslims, Hindus, Christians, and Sikh traditions to support this moral cause of the independence of India.
You shared something beautiful out of the Tao in one of your chapters, and I wanted to read it and then ask you about a conversation you had. This particular piece says, "A good soldier is not violent. A good fighter is not angry. A good winner is not vengeful. A good employer is humble. A brave and passionate man will kill or be killed. A brave and calm man will always preserve life."
Right.
And it struck me, as we talk a lot on this program about this balance of masculine and feminine energies. I remember a conversation I had several years ago with David Corton. He had a book that he'd written many years ago called The Great Turning. And he actually had a chapter on war and talked about how oftentimes war is caused by this predominant masculine energy that's
right.
taken place, and men especially not getting in touch with the feminine energy. You had, and boy, I was envious of this, you had an opportunity to have conversation with Robert Bly.
Right.
And I'd like for you to share a little bit about that conversation, what he shared with you.
Well, yes, it was interesting. I was studying, Hindustani music and so forth, and I started playing Indian music on the soprano saxophone, ragas on the soprano saxophone. And the tabla player, who Robert Bly would use, Robert Bly would speak and read poetry, and the sitarist would play music, play a raga, and the tabla player would accompany. And this was a part of his men's conferences. And well, I went to one of them because I knew the tabla player was sort of invited to go, and that's how I got a chance to meet Robert Bly. Well, it turns out Robert Bly used to play saxophone.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And so we kind of struck up a little conversation, and he said, "Why don't you come on and play something?" So I played something on stage during his men's conference. It was in Indianapolis, and then afterwards I got a chance to have lunch with him and then have dinner. And I said to him, when someone told me that what you do is you read poetry while a sitarist plays a raga and the tabla player accompanies, and you do this to a group of men. I said, this, I don't see how this would work. I mean, I used to be a member of a poetry group, and we would have poetry meetings, and 90% of the people that came were women,
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, how many men come to these conferences? And he says, well sometimes 2,000. And so I said to Robert Bly, I said, it's one of those things which I never would have thought would work, but it does work. And he says, yes, it does work, because he's touching a deeper level of the person. He's getting beyond. Using poetry and music simultaneously allowed him to get beyond the intellect and those masculine energies to allow them to subside, so that those right brain faculties that I've mentioned would be awakened. And oftentimes he would read the poetry of Rumi, the Sufi poet, which is beautiful images, which the language of which is very right-brained language, not language that's logical and rational, the language which evokes that deeper part of ourselves. And that's that feminine part of ourselves.
Thank you for listening to Converging Streams, Interfaith Fellowship in Our Modern World. Our program is a production of the Muncie Interfaith Fellowship and is supported by our community. We thank you, our listeners and followers, for your support. To connect with Converging Streams, including listening to our entire catalog of past programs, getting our latest new content, and making your own contribution to this program, visit our website, convergingstreams.org. Converging Streams is produced by Tony Piazza and George Wolfe. Thank you for listening and have a pleasant week.